What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks into what he thinks is a friendly interview, only to find himself facing a host determined to tear him down on live television? The answer involves a legendary meltdown that had security rushing to the stage and left audiences stunned into silence. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really motivated Colbert's aggressive approach that night. Trust me, you're going to want to hear every word of what went down. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert was running like clockwork on this particular evening. The audience was buzzing with anticipation as they waited for the night's main guest academy, award winner Denzel Washington, to make his entrance. Washington was there to promote his latest directorial effort, a powerful drama that had been generating serious Oscar buzz since its festival premiere. As the cameras rolled and Colbert delivered his opening monologue, there was an unusual edge to his humor. That night, several jokes seemed to target the very themes that Washington's new film explored, themes of redemption, forgiveness, and second chances. The audience laughed, but there was something almost mean-spirited about the way Colbert delivered each punchline as if he was warming up for something bigger. When Washington finally walked onto the stage, the contrast was immediately apparent. The actor carried himself with his usual dignity and grace, offering a warm smile to the audience and a respectful handshake to his host. Colbert's grip lingered just a moment too long, and those watching closely might have noticed the slight tightening around his eyes, a hint of what was brewing beneath his television persona. "Denzel Washington, everybody," Colbert announced as they took their seats, man of faith, trailer-acclaimed director, and someone who's never been afraid to speak his mind about what he believes in. Washington settled into his chair, clearly expecting the usual promotional interview. "Thank you for having me, Stephen. Always a pleasure to be here." "Oh, the pleasure is all mine," Colbert replied, but his tone carried an undertone that suggested otherwise. "So let's talk about your new film. It's quite the departure from your usual action roles. Very serious, very spiritual. Some might say preachy." The word preachy hung in the air like a challenge. Washington's expression remained composed, but there was a slight shift in his posture, a barely perceptible straightening that suggested he had caught the host's tone. "I wouldn't call it preachy," Washington responded carefully. "It's a story about human nature, about the capacity for growth and change. I think audiences are hungry for stories that acknowledge both our flaws and our potential for something better." Colbert leaned forward slightly, his smile never wavering, but his eyes growing sharper. "Human potential? Sure. But isn't it interesting how Hollywood always seems to find redemption for certain types of characters, while completely writing off others? I mean, your film's protagonist gets his second chance, his moment of grace. But what about the people he heard along the way? What about their stories?" This wasn't a typical late-night talk show question, and Washington knew it. The actor paused, studying his host's face, as if trying to read between the lines that's actually addressed in the film. Washington said slowly, "The story doesn't ignore the consequences of his actions. Part of true redemption is acknowledging the harm you've caused and working to make amends where possible." "Where possible?" Colbert repeated, as if tasting the words. "That's convenient, isn't it? Making amends where possible. What happens when it's not possible? What happens when the damage is done, and there's no going back?" The audience began to sense that something unusual was happening. This wasn't the playful banter they were used to seeing on late-night television. There was a tension building between the two men that felt personal, as if Colbert was working through some private grievance, using Washington as a proxy. Washington maintained his composure, but his voice carried a note of caution when he responded, "I think that's where faith comes in. Stephen, not everyone believes in it, and I respect that. But for me, and for the character, in this film, there's a belief that no one is beyond redemption, that everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst moment faith," Colbert said, and now his smile had turned almost predatory. "Right, you're known for that. Very public about your Christianity. Very vocal about traditional values. Tell me, in your version of faith, is there room for people who don't fit into traditional molds, or is redemption only available to those who follow a very specific playbook?" The question landed like a slap, and for the first time, Washington's mask of professional courtesy slipped slightly. His jaw tightened, and when he spoke, there was steel in his voice. "My faith teaches me that God loves all people. Stephen, every single person, regardless of who they are or how they live their lives. I don't judge anyone, and I don't appreciate the implication that I do." Colbert sat back in his chair, clearly pleased that he had gotten under Washington's skin. "Oh, I'm not implying anything, I'm asking directly, because you've been pretty vocal over the years about what you consider moral behavior, about the importance of family values, about traditional marriage. So I'm curious, when you talk about redemption and second chances, are you including everyone in that, or just the people who agree with your worldview?" The studio had grown uncomfortably quiet. Even the crew members seemed to sense that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Washington took a deep breath, clearly fighting to maintain his composure. "Stephen, I came here to talk about a film that I'm proud of, a story that I think has something meaningful to say. I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish with these questions, but if you want to have a philosophical debate about faith and morality, maybe we should do that off camera." But Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, Washington's attempt to redirect seemed to energize him. "Oh no, I think this is exactly the conversation we should be having on camera, because you put your beliefs out there. You use your platform to promote certain ideas about how people should live. And I think the audience deserves to know whether those beliefs include room for everyone or just a select few." Washington's eyes flashed with something dangerous, a warning that Colbert either didn't see or chose to ignore. The actor leaned forward in his chair, his voice dropping to a level that somehow carried more authority than if he had shouted, "Let me be very clear about something, Stephen. My faith teaches me to love everyone, to treat everyone with dignity and respect. But what you're doing right now, this isn't about my beliefs or my film. This is about you trying to create some kind of gotcha moment for your audience, and I'm not going to be a part of it." Colbert's smile widened, but there was nothing warm about it now. A gotcha moment. I'm asking legitimate questions about the man behind the message. You've built a career on playing heroes, on being the moral center of your films, and you've used your platform to promote certain values. I think people have a right to know whether those values extend to everyone, or just the people you approve of. You keep saying that Washington shot back, his patience clearly wearing thin. You keep implying that I judge people, that I exclude people, but you haven't asked me a single specific question. You're just making vague accusations and hoping something sticks. That's not journalism, Stephen. That's character assassination. The audience was completely silent now, watching this confrontation unfold with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. This was unlike anything they had ever seen on late-night television. Colbert straightened in his chair, his demeanor becoming more aggressive. "Okay, you want specific? Let's talk about your comments regarding marriage and family. You've spoken at length about the importance of traditional family structures. Do you believe that non-traditional families are somehow lesser? Do you think children raised by same-sex couples are missing something? Essential. Washington's face darkened. I have never ever said that. Any family structure is lesser than another. I have never said that children raised by loving parents, regardless of who those parents are missing anything. You're putting words in my mouth that I have never spoken, but you have spoken about the importance of traditional marriage. Colbert pressed, you've talked about your own marriage as an example of what commitment looks like. The implication is clear, the implication is in your head, not in my words. Washington fired back, I can talk about my own marriage, my own family, my own experience, without that being an attack on anyone else's choices or circumstances. But apparently, in your world, I'm not allowed to have personal beliefs, without being branded as some kind of bigot. Colbert leaned back, clearly enjoying the rising tension. Personal beliefs become public policy when they're promoted by someone with your influence. You've spoken at churches. You've given interviews about faith and family values. You've made yourself a spokesman for a particular worldview. I've shared my personal experience. Washington said, his voice rising slightly. I've talked about what works for me, what gives my life meaning. I have never told anyone else how to live their lives, and I resent the suggestion that I have. But isn't that exactly what your new film does? Colbert countered. Doesn't it present redemption through a very specific lens, a very particular type of faith? Aren't you telling audiences that this is the path to salvation? Washington stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. The sudden movement caused a ripple of gasps from the audience. That's it, I'm done with. This Colbert remained seated, but his posture suggested he was ready for whatever came next. We're in the middle of an interview, Denzel. Surely you can handle a few challenging questions. Washington's voice was now loud enough to carry clearly through the studio without his microphone. You haven't asked me a single challenging question. You've made accusations, you've twisted my words, and you've created straw man arguments to knock down. This isn't journalism. This isn't even good television. This is a hit job. A hit job. Colbert stood as well, facing Washington across the interview desk. I'm asking you to defend positions you've taken publicly. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't have taken those positions in the first place. The two men were now standing face to face, the tension between them palpable. Washington's hands were clenched at his sides, his jaw tight with controlled anger. I can defend any position I've ever taken, Washington said, his voice dangerously quiet. But I won't be ambushed by someone who's clearly had this agenda from the moment I walked out here. You've been looking for a fight from the beginning of this interview, and I want to know why Colbert's mask of television professionalism finally slipped completely. You want to know why because I'm tired of celebrities who use their platform to promote division while hiding behind the language of love and faith. I'm tired of people who claim to speak for God while marginalizing anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of righteousness. There it is, Washington said, pointing at his host. There's the real Stephen Colbert. Not the character you play on television, not the witty host making clever observations. That's the man who's been sitting across from me this whole time. The man who decided before this interview even started that I was his enemy. The studio was in complete chaos now. Producers were speaking urgently into their headsets. Camera operators were unsure whether to keep rolling, and the audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether they were witnessing great television or a complete disaster. Colbert stepped around the desk, moving closer to Washington. I decided, you were my enemy. You're the one who built a career on moral superiority, who lectures people about values while living in a Hollywood bubble. You have no idea what real people face, what real struggles look like. Moral superiority. Washington's voice cracked like a whip. I grew up in Mount Vernon, New York. My father left when I was 14. I know exactly what struggle looks like, what real people face. I worked my way through college. I earned everything I have. And I've tried to use whatever platform I've been given to encourage people to give them hope. But apparently, that makes me the villain in your story. Hope for who Colbert shot back. Hope for people who think like you, who believe like you, who look like you. What about everyone else? What about the people your traditional values leave behind? Washington stepped closer, close enough that he could speak in a normal voice and still be heard clearly. You don't know me, Stephen. You don't know what I believe. You don't know who I am. And you sure as hell don't know who I care about. You've created this version of me in your head, this conservative boogeyman that you can tear down on television to make yourself look progressive and enlightened. I know what you've said publicly. Colbert replied, not backing down, despite Washington's intimidating presence. I know the positions you've taken, the organizations you've supported. Then, I've supported literacy programs in urban communities. I've funded scholarships for underprivileged kids, regardless of their background. I've worked with organizations that help formerly incarcerated people reintegrate into society, but none of that fits your narrative. Does it? Colbert's face flushed red. His carefully maintained television persona, completely abandoned now. Don't lecture me about charity work. Every celebrity writes checks to make themselves feel better. That doesn't excuse the damage your public statements cause to communities that are already marginalized. Washington's laugh was bitter and sharp. Damage. You want to talk about damage? Look around you, Stephen. Look at what you're doing right now. You invited me here under false pretenses. You've spent the last 20 minutes attacking my character, based on assumptions and half-truths. And now you're standing here acting like you're some kind of social justice warrior. You're not fighting for anyone. You're performing for your audience. At least I'm honest about my agenda, Colbert snapped back. I'm not hiding behind religion and family values while quietly supporting systems that oppress people. Systems that oppress people. Washington's voice rose to a roar that could be heard clearly throughout the studio. What systems? Name one system I've supported that oppresses anyone. Give me one specific example, instead of these vague accusations you keep throwing around. Colbert faltered for a moment, clearly not prepared for such a direct challenge. Your political donations, your associations. With certain organizations, my political donations are a matter of public record, and they've gone to candidates from both parties who I believed would serve their communities well. My associations are with charities that help people regardless of their race, religion, or sexual orientation. But you already knew that, didn't you? You knew it, and you chose to ignore it, because it doesn't fit the story you wanted to tell tonight. The host's composure was cracking under Washington's relentless counterattack. This isn't about facts. This is about the message you send when you promote traditional values in a society that's trying to move beyond those limitations. Traditional values. Washington stepped even closer, his presence filling the space between them. You mean values like hard work, personal responsibility, treating people with respect, taking care of your family. Those are the traditional values I talk about. But you've decided that means something else. Entirely. Haven't you? Everyone knows what traditional values is code. For Colbert shot back desperately. Code for what Washington demanded. Say it, Stephen. Stop hiding behind implications and code words. Tell this audience exactly what you think I believe. Tell them what you really think of me. The studio was dead silent, except for the low hum of cameras and equipment. Even the producers had stopped their frantic whispering, transfixed by the confrontation unfolding before them. Colbert's mouth opened and closed several times, clearly struggling to find words that wouldn't completely destroy his career. Washington pressed his advantage. You can't say it, can you? Because if you actually said what you're implying, if you actually made the accusations, you're dancing around, everyone would see how empty they are. You've built this entire attack on insinuation and assumption. I'm trying to hold you accountable, Colbert said, weakly. Accountable for what? Washington's voice filled the studio. For having faith. For talking about my family, for making movies that suggest people can change and grow. What exactly am I supposed to be accountable for? Colbert's response was barely audible for the influence you have, for the message you send. The message I send is that people matter, that everyone has value, that we can all be better than our worst moments. If that's offensive to you, if that's something you need to attack, then maybe the problem isn't with my message. The host seemed to realize he was losing the confrontation badly. His voice became shriller, more desperate. You're twisting my words. You're making this about something it's not. I'm not twisting anything. Washington replied, his voice now calm, but carrying an undertone of barely controlled fury. I'm asking you to be specific about your accusations, and you can't do it. You brought me here to tear me down, but you don't actually have anything to tear down. You have assumptions. You have biases, but you don't have facts. Colbert looked around desperately as if seeking help from his staff or audience. We need to go to commercial, he said suddenly. No, Washington said firmly. We're not going to commercial. You started this, Stephen. You wanted to have this conversation on camera. So let's finish it on camera. This is my show, Colbert said, his voice rising. Again, I decide when we go to commercial. Your show, Washington's laugh was harsh. This stopped being your show the moment you decided to ambush a guest instead of conducting an interview. This became something else entirely. Colbert signaled frantically to his producers. But Washington continued speaking, his voice carrying clearly through the studio. You know what the real tragedy is here? Stephen, you actually had an opportunity to have a meaningful conversation about faith, about values, about how we treat each other in this country, but instead of engaging with ideas, you chose to attack the person. Instead of discussing beliefs, you chose to assassinate character security. Colbert called out, his voice cracking slightly. We need security. The word hung in the air like a bomb. Washington stared at his host in complete disbelief. Security? You're calling security because I'm asking you to back up your accusations with facts. You're calling security because you started a fight. You can't. Finished. Two large men in suits were already moving toward the stage, but Washington held up his hand to stop them. Don't worry, he said, his voice now deadly calm. I'm leaving, but not because he's kicking me off. I'm leaving because this isn't worth my time or my dignity. Washington began removing his microphone, his movements deliberate and controlled. You know what's really sad about this. Stephen, I actually respected you before tonight. I thought you were someone who used humor to make important points. Someone who challenged people to think. But what you've shown me tonight is that you're just another bully with a platform. Get him out of here, Colbert said to security, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm going, Washington replied, dropping his microphone on the chair. But before I do, let me leave you and your audience with this thought. If this is what passes for discourse in our society, if this is how we treat people who dare to have different perspectives or experiences, then we're in serious trouble. He turned to address the stunned audience directly. I came here tonight to talk about a film that I'm proud of, a story about redemption and second chances. Instead, I was subjected to a character assassination based on assumptions and prejudice. I hope you'll see the film anyway and judge for yourselves what it has to say. As Washington walked toward the exit, Colbert made one final desperate attempt to regain control. Ladies and gentlemen, Denzel Washington. Everyone. We'll be right back after this commercial break. But Washington stopped and turned back one last time. No, Stephen. There's no we here. There's you alone with your assumptions and your anger, and there's everyone else trying to figure out what just happened. The actor's final words echoed through the silent studio as he disappeared through the exit, leaving behind a host who looked like he'd just been hit by a truck and an audience that sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The cameras kept rolling for several more seconds, capturing Colbert's face as he realized the magnitude of what had just occurred before finally cutting to commercial. So there you have it. The incredible story of how one of Hollywood's most respected actors was kicked off late-night television after refusing to back down from a host's unprovoked attack. What do you think really motivated Colbert's aggressive approach that night? Was this a calculated attempt to create viral content? Or was there something deeper driving his hostility? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories that show you what really happens when the cameras stop rolling.